So sometimes it's not about how cold it gets, it's about how fast it gets cold. Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. In this video, I'm going to take a look around at a few things in the garden that have a little bit of damage on them from some recent cold that we had. As I said at the beginning of the video, it's not always about the temperature you get to, it's how rapidly it goes to that cold temperature. We had had a very mild fall here in Raleigh and other areas as well, and the plants weren't fully asleep. And so we went from very mild conditions to very cold conditions over just a few hours with a driving wind. We actually didn't reach a temperature that would have damaged some of these plants, okay? And I'll talk about that more in this video. I'm in zone 7B in Raleigh, and our average low temperature is between 5 and 10 degrees, and we only got down to 11. And so technically my zone 7 plants should have been just fine giving the temperature we were given. But again, it got there a little too quickly. And I've talked frequently in my videos in the past about fall planting. Fall is a great time for planting. Winter is a fine time for planting as long as the soil's workable. But we don't want to be planting plants that are either marginal at that time of year, meaning we're pushing the boundaries on cold, or that have come out of a greenhouse. And the reason for that is if you take a plant that's been in a greenhouse, it has had no cold on it, it has not gone through the dips, of the fall where, we would go to have 40-degree nights and then 30-degree nights and then upper 20-degree nights, and it goes to sleep just naturally through a process where if you bring it out of a greenhouse and it's covered in new growth and it immediately goes to freezing, the plant's just not prepared for that, even if it's a plant that's very, very cold hardy. So we're going to look around at a few things and talk about the way in which cold actually damages the plants and what I'm going to do about it. Before I talk about the types of damage that we might see in the garden from cold via wind or actual temperature, it probably should be pointed out the length of time it stays cold will matter as well. So even if a plant is hardy down to 10 degrees, like this Fatedra right here, if it stays that way for 3 days, where you get down to 10 degrees and then maybe you only get up to 28, you don't come above freezing. I'm talking about Fahrenheit here. You don't come back above freezing, and then it drops down to 12 that next night, and then it doesn't come above freezing, then it goes back down to 10. That length of time will have an impact. So, saying something is hardy down to zone 10 doesn't necessarily mean it's hardy down to zone 10 14 times during the winter. It may only mean it can touch 10, for a few hours and be fine. And so, again, this is the type of event we've just had where, we basically stayed below freezing for 3 solid days, and it's still, as I'm speaking right now, today is going to warm up, and we're going to get into the 40s today, but even as I'm shooting this, it's still 25, 26 degrees outside, and you can see, these plants are still under some stress. Here's a gray ghost Elysium, which looks very, very sad this morning. It will come out of this a little bit later today as it warms up, but this plant actually does have some damage, and you can see, these little rings in the leaves there where clearly there was some damage. This did not get damaged from the actual cold. I had a cover over it during the coldest temperatures, but what I couldn't do was put a cover over it while the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour. So most of this damage happened somewhere when the temperature was just at freezing. This thing's hardy down to 10 degrees, no problem, 5 degrees, probably 0 degrees if it was a bigger plant, maybe even colder than that. Again, if it was a more established plant, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the video. As well as the age of the plant does matter. This one is fairly new. It's been under some stress over here, which can be an issue. This is a very dry spot. There's a red bud above me that's a bit greedy. So this plant has not thrived over here all along, and I think has left itself a little vulnerable. So, healthy plants are definitely help with cold as well. But this one, I couldn't put a cover over it. The wind was blowing 30, 40 miles an hour, and the wind actually desiccated this plant. The wind was taking water out of those leaves faster than it could possibly. You basically think of this as chapped lips. If the wind blows across your lips, your body has a way to moisturize your lips, but not if the wind is blowing fast enough and the air is dry enough. And so this is just desiccation, and I think it's going to lose some of these leaves on the top. I'll talk more about what I'm going to do about this later in the video. So that's wind damage on that Elysium. Another type of damage we could get in the cold is the actual temperature. But I don't have any of that. I don't have, the temperature we got down to was 11 degrees. I'm in zone 7B in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so our average low temperature in zone 7B is 5 to 10 degrees. So that's our average over the course of time that, you know, the map is averaged out from, is our average low temperatures between 5 and 10. So frequently we go below 5 degrees. Zone 7A is 0 to 5 degrees. The A's and B's are basically 5-degree increments. And so zone 8 is, or zone 8A is 10 degrees to 15 degrees. That's the average low temperature for that zone. We only got down to 11 degrees and we weren't there, you know, but a few hours. The other nights were 15, 18, I think, something like that, of the other 3 nights. And so temperature didn't have much of an impact on the garden. I have several things that are only zone 8 hardy. And again, I'm in zone 7B, but again, that was a zone 8 night. It wasn't, you know, it was the bottom end of where you'd want a temperature to be. But if the plants had actually been ready, if they had experienced some more cold going into it and the temperature hadn't dove so fast, then the temperature would not have been an issue. Again, dormant plants are capable of taking even more cold than sometimes we think they are. But so really my damage out here, not cold related. It's either wind related or the dive in temperature related. And let's look at what happens when the temperature dives and a plant's not prepared. This rosemary is pretty interesting. A very small rosemary would have probably been badly damaged. I did not have a cover on this. This one is aged enough, has enough, you know, kind of woody center to it down there. It's got a little bit of browning in it, so I expect it to thin a bit, but overall I think it survived without any problem. I'll talk about what I'll do to some of these things a little later in the video. I wanted to show you, before I show you the kind of the main type of damage that we'll see from an event where it falls, the temperature falls quickly. I'll show you this Elysium right here that has a little more age on it. Again, it's wilting down a bit because it's still below freezing this morning, but overall I don't see any damage on this Florida Sunshine Elysium. The difference being, again, it wasn't under stress like the Gray Ghost Elysium over there was, and it wasn't in as open a space, and so the wind wasn't able to desiccate it as badly. And again, a plant that's not under stress, you know, that had adequate water, you know, and the adequate mulch around it, and just, again, not under stress from insects or disease or anything, you know, can really tolerate quite a bit more than one is under stress. This is Farfugium. This plant is too silly and never goes to sleep until this happens every year. It'll come back. It's a perennial, but this is a great example of a plant just becoming mush in the cold. And what happens here is there was water in the stems. It was still growing, and that water froze solid. And think about the way water freezes. It freezes with little angular, it has edges, and it's very angular as it freezes, and it actually destroys the plant from the inside out. And so rather than having the frost on the outside of the plant, think about the frost forming on the inside of the plant, and just death by 1,000 knives. Again, this plant will come back without any problem. Unfortunately, this can go different on some other plants. That Farfugium will come back for me every year despite having become mush like that. The one that probably won't is Agapanthus. Agapanthus is, unfortunately, if Agapanthus was completely dormant, if we'd had a little more cold on these and gotten them dormant, they would be fine. But freezing solid with the plant up doesn't do these plants very much good. That's been my, you know, how that's gone for me in the past. If I can get my Agapanthus to sleep, they're very, very hardy as long as they're under the ground. But these were still awake and fresh, and I suspect that they may, you know, it doesn't look so bad right this second, but I think it's going to look worse over the next few days. A plant that has really struggled to go to sleep, an example of that is butterfly bushes. It's interesting. Zone 5 hardy plant. This plant can take probably -20 if it's completely dormant, but I see them down, nurseries really struggle to grow them down on the Gulf Coast because if they're not asleep, 28 degrees can kill them because they have water up in the stems, And just like I showed you on the Farfugium, where the water freezes and busts the inside of the plant, where that plant's got energy stored under the ground. This is a woody plant, and so the wood can actually crack down in the bottom of the plant. And so sometimes we won't even know on our butterfly bushes whether we have damage on them. But I know anytime I'm going into cold like this and there's that much new growth on it, that frequently they can actually take some damage. And there's a lot of plants that can do that. There's some trees that we'll see crack along the stems, and the cracking down toward the bottom of the plant, which is not good, not good at all. But that's, again, from having the water in the plant and it not being fully asleep. Another thing that can make our plants vulnerable to freeze is having them raised up in containers. So this Pittosporum down here would be a great example of a plant that would, if I didn't have it packed together with the other containers and had a cover over it, would definitely be susceptible to having some cold damage that it wouldn't necessarily have if it was planted in the ground. But I like it in that container, and it looks great, makes me happy. And so I just piled them together and put a cover over it. And it seems that keeping it out of the wind has keeping it covered. The cover probably offers about one zone of protection, something like that. It is done just fine. My Fats hedera here has definitely gotten some, this is a zone 8 hardy plant, but here in 7B generally will do fine as long as they're pretty woody. This one's old enough now that I'm not worried about the temperatures we had actually hurting it in any way, but it had a lot of new growth on it late in the season, and either the wind or the actual cold temperature has damaged the top of it. But all I'm going to do here is take and prune this out later in the winter. I don't do it immediately. I feel like this offers probably some protection to the rest of the plant, leaving this on, and I don't know how far down it's actually going to kill. And so, day one, I'm looking at, I would definitely have to cut that top foot and a half off of it. I may see that it continues to, turn black a little further down over the next few days, few months, few weeks, and I end up having to cut a little bit more out of it. I'm not worried about whether it's dead or alive. I'm confident that its age will have protected it, but some portion of this plant is going to have to be cut back. Almost certainly some of these stems up here in the top, where this was very new growth toward the end of the season, there's some damage in there that I can't see today. And it'll show up over the next week or two. If it doesn't, that'll be great. Again, I will not have cut it off, right? So I'm going to wait on any of these decisions until toward the end of February. Here's another marginal plant. This is a Fatsia, and it looks just awful this morning, right? It's been frozen for 3 solid days. I got all this ice, in the mulch over here, where we had that rain the day before. Looks just terrible, but I don't see any noticeable actual damage on any of the leaves on this plant. I had a cover over it, so that's what's making it weep down a little bit. I think by the middle of the afternoon, this plant will look like nothing ever happened. I can't see any burn in it whatsoever. And so I think this one made it through just fine. Here's something really cool in the garden. This is a hellebore, and as you can see right there, the blooms are coming on it already. It's right after Christmas. Generally speaking, these are more toward mid to late January and into early February in my area, but they were deciding to come up a little bit earlier. Usually I go through and cut back these oldest leaves back to the ground, so let the flowers really show off on their own. I usually do that in January. I've put up videos about it in the past. That's the time I clean them up because they're about to bloom, but this year the blooms have jumped out ahead and they're not damaged at all. And so interesting thing about hellebores, and lots of plants actually, they can produce proteins that are like antifreeze. And so you see, how does this plant, you question how this plant blooms every year at the time it does when it's still winter outside basically. It's because it has ability to produce an antifreeze that basically it's a protein that prevents ice from forming inside the leaves and inside the flowers, which is really amazing. A galanthus or snowdrops is another one that can do this. A lot of plants have this capacity, if they get to sleep completely, to replace the waters up in the plant with proteins that prevent, again, this type of damage from any water, any residual water that's left from freezing and damaging the plant from the inside out, like I showed you on that Farfugium, or talked about something that frequently happens in butterfly bushes and some trees, you know, where it freezes too quick on them and they end up popping and cracking because the water in the stem expands and cracks them from the inside out. But hellebores have an amazing defense against that, and that's how they're able to put on this show in the wintertime when other things are still asleep. One of the main plants I was worried about in my landscape was this Rosalinda Indian hawthorn. Definitely a zone 8 plant. Sticks up big and tall because I've got it tree formed. So it's up here in the wind, and definitely concerned about this plant. So I had a cover over top of it, and it seems to have done just fine. I put a cover over it that I could cover it during the wind. So it was a shade cloth, allowed the wind to kind of go through it without beating up on the plant. So it wasn't plastic. And even the flower buds appear right now to have made it through. So, you know, that'll be interesting to see if it still flowers, despite the fact that the temperature jumped down too quickly on it, clearly. Again, a plant that would have no problem handling 11 degrees if it was completely asleep, but it definitely wasn't. It was already trying to put on growth for the 2023 season a little bit early, and you know, left it quite vulnerable. But it appears that simple cover has taken care of it. Plus, it's 2 years in the ground now, and again, the age of something does matter. There's one of these that's 15 feet tall, probably 10 to 15 feet wide at the Ralston Arboretum. Doesn't get any cold damage on it that I can tell every year. And again, it's just more the age of the plant than it is anything else. Another plant that I was concerned with is this pineapple guava. These are actually, temperature-wise, again, pretty daggone cold hardy, especially once they get some age on them. This one's been in the ground for about 2 years, so 11 degrees, I wouldn't have worried about it. I wouldn't even have put the cover over it at 11 degrees. If it had worked its way down to 11 and it not stayed below freezing for 3 days. And so I did have a cover over this, and it seems to have come out just fine. Again, I'm not going to be able to tell all the damage I have in the garden right at the end of the cold. I think you're going to see some stems, leaves and stems and things turn black that you can't foresee. A couple of things maybe crack down toward the base in your garden, and you know, may not come back out from that at all. Some things can and some things can't. Just depends on the plant and the age of the plant as to whether or not that can happen. But again, this is also the car sits right here, and it blocks some of the wind on this guava. Probably the wind would have been more damaging to it than anything else. Again, because it wasn't fully asleep. It actually, again, still trying to grow here. So there's some of the different types of damage we can get from cold. It can be from wind blowing across them, and long before we actually got to a temperature that could have damaged the plant. It can be from the plant not being dormant and the ice actually exploding from the inside out. That can be pretty devastating to lots of plants. And then we can get actual temperature related issues. And again, in this particular case, I didn't get down to those kinds of temperatures. And then of course, the length of time can matter as well. And so folks with shorter days up in the north that may be in the same zone that I'm in, they may be able to grow a few less things than I'm able to grow because they spend more time at those low temperatures during the winter time. So the length of time and the number of nights that you're getting those temperatures can have some impact as well. Again, I'm not going to do anything out here until I see where the actual damage is on the plant, how far it goes down into the plant, hoping not to see it happen from the bottom up, because, you know, we can get some cracking and, you know, some stems and things that where, you know, they weren't fully asleep. And so it can happen, you know, literally could have cracked near the ground, hoping that's not the case on anything. But I think that this damaged material is probably offering some protection to the plants during the winter, and it may not be as damaged as it may look, you know, this morning before it, you know, has a chance to get, you know, to temperatures back up again. So I'll wait until the end of February, beginning of March, and you guys will see videos. A lot of pruning. I got a lot of pruning to do out here regardless of whether or not some of the stuff that got burned on some of these plants was coming off anyway, so not that stressed about it overall. So good luck in your garden, and that's the kind of things to be on the lookout, and maybe why some of the damage occurred in your garden. Thanks for watching.